private arrest record for remarkably, but an aggressive $244 in a dice deal. But personality. I never was a crumb, and if I had to be a crumb, I'd rather be dead. Squirreled away money, and never indulged in extravagant pleasures. By the time he was in his 20s, Luciano had been tagged with the name of his Italian surname. His closest call came in 1929 when he was abducted, beaten, and strung up by the episode left a jagged scar on his chin. On the Lower East Side, as a wild teenager before joining Masaria's gang, Luciano cemented alliances with Jewish gangsters that would endure for a lifetime. Charlie Lucky's closest Jewish criminal companions were the shrewd Meyer Lansky and Lansky's volatile colleague, Benjamin Bugsy Siegel. There was little doubt among New York's mafiosi that Luciano had engineered Maranzano's murder, and that the hit team had been mustered by his Jewish antagonists. Luciano, however, circulated a semi-amazing plan presented the only danger to Luciano of a new war or an assassination attempt to avenge their chief's death. But Luciano's self-defense plan was readily accepted, even by Maranzano's staunchest protege, Joe Bonanno. Reflecting on Maranzano's imperious behavior after winning a brutal struggle, Bonanno decided that his patron had been an astute warlord, but unable to adapt to the culture and tactics of the new Americanized breed. Despite 6 years in America, Maranzano spoke good English and was unable to communicate with younger criminals or comprehend their street talk slang. Maranzano was old-world Sicilian in temperament and style, Bonanno explained in his autobiography. But he didn't live in Sicily anymore. In New York, he was advisor not only to Sicilians, but to American Italians. Set for anointment as head of the Castelmarese Borgata, Bonanno saw the wisdom of Luciano's new look for the mafia and accepted what he characterized as the path of peace. With the war between them over, Luciano and Bonanno held a conflict with the heads of 3 other substantial Borgatas in New York, whom Luciano considered agreeable to his plans. The other bosses were Gaetano Galliani, Vincent Mondani, and Joe Profaci. Without any specific group, in 1931, 5 mafia families had evolved from a contested decade. The 5 families would survive under various names and leaders into the next century. No other American city would have more than 1 mafia family, nor would any other Borgata come close to matching the size, wealth, power, and influence of any of the New York families. Before the year ended, the New York bosses traveled to Chicago for a national conference with Al Capone, Chicago's Italian mob titan, and the leaders of more than 20 other mafia factions in the country. The great innovator Luciano explained his concepts for avoiding inter-family and inter-family mob forms and establishing lasting prosperity. He accepted as pragmatic Maranzano's organizational structure improves performing the roles of the work of the families, but added a wrinkle to the hierarchies. Besides a sopracampo, an underboss, each family regime or administration will have a state council or to isolate problems inside the family and to resolve feuds with other Borgatas.
This is your gameplay for something, Wow.
Hey, let me see. Again.
This is your gameplay for something,
serve as the Mafia's sacred code, its Ten Commandments. Without discussion or debate, it was universally understood
Yeah,
by
wait till we
bosses
start
that
being an actual
membership
movie,
of
but
the
then we're gonna get to do editing.
to men whose parents were both from Sicily or southern Italy. Italian heritage of only one parent would be insufficient for acceptance into a family. Bloodlines were critical factors for determining trustworthiness and for acceptance as a man of honor. The size of each family was fixed at the number of made men it had at that time, with replacements allowed only for dead members. Freezing the strength of each borgata was intended to prevent surreptitious expansions to dominate other families, and possibly ignite territorial conflicts. Limited membership also was seen as a business-like means of selecting the best and most competent candidates. Luciano made it clear that Mafia membership was a lifetime obligation. There were no provisions for resignation or early retirement. The only way out is in a box, like he emphasized. While not a written document, the code illuminated the Mafia's fundamental guiding principle. The survival of each family and the combined national mafia overshadowed the needs and safety of the individual mafioso. Every family was therefore obligated to maintain the organizational viability that would withstand any assault by law enforcement. The purpose of the code was to enable the family to continue functioning efficiently, even if the boss or other hierarchs were removed.
There's nothing to do about.
The organization would be supreme, its parts replaceable. Luciano unveiled one more idea, his most striking innovation, without precedent in the Sicilian Mafia or among Americanized gangsters. It was the creation of the Commission, the equivalent of a national board of directors that would establish general policies and regulations for all families in the country,
Daddy, look how little the
and
dam
would
is.
settle territorial and other disputes that might arise.
Look how little
The
the dam
Commission
is.
would be the vital link between families
Look how little the game is.
ensure
Look how
cooperation
little
and
the
harmony
dam
among
is.
new criminal ventures.
Wow.
It would be analogous to an underworld Supreme Court, whose primary function was to prevent warfare while recognizing the sovereignty of the individual groups. Luciano and Bolano originally wanted to name the new body the Committee for Peace, after its main purpose. But younger, American-reared mafiosi found the name too difficult to pronounce in Italian or Sicilian. Clearly defining New York's keystone position as the Mafia's national headquarters, Luciano gave representation on the commission to all 5 New York families. Other members of the new body would come from Chicago and Buffalo, with the proviso that more families could be added if necessary. Chicago's selection was an obvious recognition of Capone and his gang's strength, wealth, and domination of numerous rackets in the Midwest. The boss of the Buffalo family was Stefano Magaddino, another immigrant from Castellamare del Volpo. Magaddino was highly respected and feared because he was a cousin of Joe Bonanno and had business ties to mafia organizations in the Midwest and in Canada. Luciano surprised the Underworld Convention by insisting that each family on the commission have a single vote, with all decisions determined by the majority. His successes in New York had elevated him into a position of unrivaled national importance, and there was little doubt that among the nation's mafia bosses, he was first among equals. There would have been no opposition if Charlie Bucky had nominated himself as the first capo di tutti capi, boss and bosses. But Luciano realized that the bloodshed in the previous decade as families fought for dominance and underworld monopolies, climaxed by the Castellamare War, had demonstrated the years after the Chicago conflict. Luciano reminisced about it with him in preparation for a proposed film version of Luciano's life. Goss asserted that Luciano summarized his main purpose for the meeting with this colorful quote. I explained to him that all the war horse shit was out. I explained to him we was in a business that had to
The blue
conclude
rock.
without explosion
The
for
pine.
2 minutes. Knocking guys off just because they come
Hey,
from a
Daddy,
different
look.
part of Sicily.
The blue
That kind of crap is
book
giving us a bad name.
was that
And
one.
we couldn't operate until it stopped.
This is the battle bus.
Although the substance of Gauch's conversations with
Oh my God.
Luciano was never documented,
At first they are partying.
the quotation
They had,
matched accounts that investigators dug up of Luciano's goals at the section in Chicago. Cosa Nostra experts agree that all of Luciano's remodeling proposals were accepted by the nation's mob families. Luciano's game plan clearly established that the American Borgales would never be subsidiaries or satellites of the Sicilian Mafia. Although drawing on Sicilian traditions, especially Rometta, Americans' independent mafiosi were adapting themselves to the unique social and cultural forces that existed on their company. The Chicago secret meeting reportedly ended at the Blackstone Hotel, with Al Capone hosting a feast where the delegates, acting as if they were at a jazz-era orgy, made merry, enjoying the favors of a plethora of prostitutes. Without the awareness of the nation's vast law enforcement apparatus, in 1931, an American mafia had been custom designed for efficient plunder, and New York was its epicenter. 5. Dirty Thirties. For millions of Americans, the 1930s was the paradigm of hard times, the decade of the Great Depression. Justifiably known as the Dirty Thirties, it was an era haunted by unprecedented economic impoverishment, bank failures, shuttered factories, violent strikes, abandoned farms, homeless wanderers, bread lines, and soup kitchens. At the mid-year of crisis in 1931, about 15 million people, almost 25% of the nation's workforce, were unemployed. The newly hatched mafia families, however, had no plan for work. The decade was the onset of unparalleled prosperity and cooperation that would extend far into the century. At the 1931 Chicago conclave of top mobsters, Lucky Luciano, the mafia's visionary criminal genius, installed the organizational foundations that each of the score of existing borgatas used to construct networks of illicit enterprises. Joe Bonanno, one of the bosses present at the creation of the modern American Mafia, was gratified. No internal squabbles marred the unity of our family, and no outside interference threatened the family or me, Bonanno marveled in his autobiography. Luciano's managerial revolution was intended to build bulwarks that would protect and insulate himself and the other bosses from implication in the transgressions committed by their families. Thereby, each chieftain or godfather would reap the profits from his family's criminal activities without risking indictment or imprisonment. Ironically, while Luciano's blueprint safeguarded most of his fellow bosses, he was the only New York mobster of his era to suffer a long prison sentence. Prohibition had been the catalyst for transforming the neighborhood gangs of the 1920s into smoothly run regional and national criminal corporations. Men like Luciano, Bonanno, and Lucchese began as small-time hoodlums and graduated as underworld leviathans. Bootlegging gave them on-the-job executive training in a dangerous environment. It taught them how to plan and run the intricate machinery necessary for producing and supplying huge quantities of fatal illicit. Still in their 20s and 30s, this new breed of mafiosi became expert in marshaling small armies of smugglers, truckers, cargo handlers, and gunmen. The young billionaire mobsters also became adept at laundering money to dodge tax evasion problems, and learned how to drive and manipulate political and police contacts to forestall law enforcement headaches. The Chicago meeting was a success. A power structure was in place. The nation's mafia leaders tacitly agreed to assemble every 5 years at a national crime forum, much like a political party or a religious synod, to fraternize and review mutual concerns. Within the new Luciano and Bonanno families, their ranks had enlarged as a byproduct of the Castellanese War and the need for reinforcements in a costly campaign. While the Luciano plan and the Commission united all of the country's borgatas and generally recognized rules and concepts. There were regional distinctions about membership. Joe Bonanno refused to subscribe to the idea of Miss Morgana as a melting pot for all Italians. Only men of full Sicilian heritage, he insisted, could be faithful to Cosa Nostra culture and obligations. None of the families would permit the utterance of the name Mafia to identify their organizations. The New York families adopted Cosa Nostra, the Mafia code name in Sicily. Chicago called itself the Outfit. Eventually, among mafiosi, the most popular rule for identifying a made man was the simple expression, he's connected. As the gangsters dispersed from Chicago, most of them realized that prohibition, the lush money machine, was on its deathbed. A majority of the public and most politicians wanted to rescind the law as unenforceable, unpopular, and a corrupting influence on law enforcement agencies. The worsening depression provided another anti-prohibition argument for the new administration in 1933 of President Franklin D. Roosevelt. Supporters of repeal contended that it would revive the legitimate alcohol industry and generate thousands of new jobs. In December 1933, the 21st Amendment to the Constitution was adopted, repealing the 18th Amendment that had outlawed the production and sale of alcoholic beverages. On the first night that the 13-year dry spell ended, in New York, tens of thousands of governors poured into Times Square in a spontaneous celebration. The huge throng required the emergency mustering of almost the entire city police force of 20,000 officers for crowd control. The 5 New York Mafia families were prepared for the cosmic change. Prohibition had enriched them so handsomely that they had sufficient scarlet money and muscle to bankroll new rackets and crimes, or to simply take over existing ones for rival ethnic, Irish, and Jewish gangsters. As an example of the Mafia's financial resources, movie producer Martin Gosh said that Luciano told him that his gross take from bootlegging alone in 1925 was at least $12 million, and that after expenses, mainly for a small army of truck drivers and guards and bribes to law enforcement officials and agents, he cleared $4 million in profits. Prohibition was barely even spreading, while the New York Mafia was feasting from a smorgasbord of new and expected traditional crimes. Bookmaking, loan sharking, prostitution, narcotics trafficking, robberies, cargo hijackings, and the numbers game. Racket became the popular term for these new mafia endeavors. The use of racket as slang to describe an underworld activity can be traced back to 18th century England. Its exact derivation is unclear, though it might be related to alternate definitions of racket: a clamor, a social incitement, dissipation, or gaiety. In the mid-19th century, the term came into use as a raucous private party held by Irish-American gangs in New York. To subsidize their rackets, the gang members demanded or exploited contributions from merchants and individuals, whose property and lives would otherwise be in danger. Racketeer is a totally American invention, probably coined by a newspaper reporter to describe the innovative 1930s breed of mobsters. One shakedown the post-prohibition mafiosi borrowed from the defunct Black Hen, who's setting up police security to protect businesses from arsonists and bandits who might damage their companies. Merchants and restaurants
So all the games were working up there in football?
Yeah, and I played games with the New York
Are you getting tough to use it? Like, you have to get used to the Xbox controller, but pretty much the same as PlayStation, pretty much.
They work as strike breakers for manufacturing.
Hey, dude. And you're making a video?
But don't worry about that. The other controller controller is coming tomorrow, so y'all can have 2 controllers up there. And y'all can both play games.
Okay.
Are you looking forward to having the other controller too? So you can play games?
Yeah.
Hey, are you ready for the other controller to come too, so y'all can play 2-player games?
And Gail, where is it?
They're my room.
Ultimately, the unions paid them off by allowing mobile companies to operate 9-unit shops. Some mobsters muscled into companies as secret partners, getting payoffs from the principal owners in exchange for allowing them to operate 9-unit shops, or for guaranteeing sweetheart labor contracts if they were unionized. Lucky Luciano, the only godfather with close ties to top Jewish gangsters during Prohibition, had little difficulty in absorbing Jewish garments and rackets into his own dominion. Jewish hoods became junior partners and vassals of Luciano in one of the city's largest and most profitable industries. According to Joe Bonanno, who shunned mergers and deals with the Jewish underworld, Luciano in the mid-1950s was the dominant mob figure in the garment industry. Luciano had extensive interests in the clothing industry, especially in the Amalgamated Clothing Workers Union, Bonanno wrote later. Charlie Lucky offered to place Bonanno in important positions in the Amalgamated, which was the principal union involved in manufacturing men's and boys' clothing. Once empowered in the union, Bonanno, like Luciano, could control vital jobs, set union contractual terms, and share kickbacks with the manufacturers. Luciano's offer was more likely turned down because Bonanno did not want to be obligated to another family. The independent market Bonanno had another reason to go in. He had his own connections to the other vital clothing union, the International Ladies Garment Workers Union. Like the other New York bosses, Bonanno had numerous traditional criminal activities and new front enterprises to keep him busy and affluent. He had taken over a variety of legitimate businesses, coat manufacturing companies, a tucking company, laundries, and cheese suppliers. There was also a Joe Bonanno funeral parlor in Brooklyn that was suspected of being used to secretly dispose of victims murdered by the family. The ingenious Bonanno was said to have used specially built 2-tiered or double-decker coffins with a secret compartment under the recorded corpse that allowed 2 bodies to be buried simultaneously. Income from these fronts was a handy means for warding off tax audits and justifying his above-average lifestyle. Bonanno's underlying capitalist philosophy rested on a basic theory that guided him and other bosses: eliminate all competition. One must remember that in the economic sphere, one of the objectives of a family was to set up monopolies as far as it was possible, he explained in a man of honor. In addition to the garment industry, the 5 mafia families used strong-arm tactics and their influence in unions to control and take kickbacks from stevedore companies on the Brooklyn waterfront, the Fulton Fish Market, a wholesale and produce markets in Manhattan and Brooklyn, construction and trucking companies, and hotels and restaurants. The Sicilian Italian gangs even forced out Jewish racketeers from their pioneering roles in the $50 million a year kosher chicken business. New York's large Jewish population and its orthodox dietary rules guaranteed a steady demand for the interrelated poultry industry. The Jewish hoods were content with simple, old-fashioned protection tactics. They engaged in small shakedowns of frightened and defenseless businessmen, trying to keep their companies and their bodies intact. Inspired by Tommy Three-Finger Brown Lucchese, the Mafia had more grandiose plans. Lucchese's gunmen pushed aside their Jewish counterparts, and in what would become a classic model for industrial racketeering, established a cartel among live chicken suppliers, wholesalers, and slaughtering companies. Lucchese formed a supposed trade group, the New York Live Poultry Chamber of Commerce, and through a combination of subtle intimidation and promises of ample profits, forced most kosher chicken businesses to join. Prices were fixed to put an end to normal competition, and each company was assigned a share of the market. In return, the The company paid a fee depending on gross sales to the Mafia Front Poultry Association. Lucchese and his helpmates, of course, took a hefty cut for supporting the cartel and preventing new companies from competing in New York. The companies that kicked back part of their profits to Lucchese simply passed along the crime tax through higher prices to their customers. Within the industries they controlled, from the garment center to the waterfront, the mafiosi profited further from illegal gambling and loan sharking rings that fleeced wage earners. No competition was allowed by the five families. Jewish and Irish gangsters, who had run their own powerful Prohibition-era gangs, offered little resistance to the mafia's drive for absolute control. Even Meyer Lansky, the most influential Jewish gangster of his time in the 1930s and 40s, needed the approval of his mafia partners for most of his projects. Lansky accompanied Luciano to mafia conventions, but was never allowed to sit in on discussions. Before the mafia takeover, the undisputed Jewish criminal virtuoso of the 1920s was Arnold Rothstein.
I see a bunch of stuff like
His omnibus activities included international bootlegging,
this today
legal
and driving back.
racketeering, stock frauds, fencing stolen diamonds and bonds, narcotics trafficking, and gambling schemes. Rothstein's legendary coup was engineering the Black Sox scandal by fixing the 1919 Baseball World Series, in which the heavily favored Chicago White Sox were defeated by the Cincinnati Reds. Known along Broadway as the Brain and the Big Bankroll, Rothstein was an unthreatening-looking figure, soft-spoken, and a spiffy dresser. His authority was enforced by an entourage of brutal henchmen, and he tutored a crop of future Jewish and Italian underworld stars, including Lansky and Luciano. The charismatic Rothstein is believed to have been the inspiration for Ed Scott Fitzgerald's gangster, Myra Wolfsheim, in The Great Gatsby. Whatever obstacles Rothstein had created to the mafia's takeover of New York brackets were eliminated before Prohibition ended. On the night of November 4, 1998, he was found staggering on the sidewalk in Midtown Manhattan, shot in the stomach. Rothstein survived due to his own code of honor, refused to identify the shooter as quote. "I've been talking to you," Detective quoted him as saying from his hospital deathbed. "You stick to your trade, I'll stick to mine." He was dead at age 46. George Wolfe, a Jewish lawyer in New York who represented Cosa Nostra and Jewish gangsters in the 1930s and 40s, had a close-up view of the new ethnic underworld relationships. The two groups have always worked in surprisingly good harmony, Wolfe commented. The Italians respecting the Jews for their financial brains, and the Jews preferring to stay quietly behind the scenes, and the Italians use the muscle needed. Mafia strength stemmed partly from the ultimate organized crime weapon, murder. At the 1931 Chicago meeting, Nazis figuratively said in concrete the rule that only mafiosi could kill mafiosi. And while they could kill outsiders, other criminals would face death for even threatening the nation. The people Michael Helliman warned of the danger in challenging mafia authority in matters of money. Jews, outside, wind up at the short end of the cane down there and run by the mafia. Somehow, they always wound up paying, even when they were right. During Prohibition, Irish gangsters dominated many sections of New York. Their most powerful and ruthless icon was Primal, with stakes in 24 nightclubs, including the acclaimed Cotton Club in Harlem. Madden's reputation for revenge and craftiness, and his political influence at City Hall were so potent that even the Italian gangs stayed on his territory.
Okay, where am I going?
But the death of Prohibition and the rise of the Mafia persuaded Madden that he could no longer survive or compete in any sphere with the Italian gangs.
I'm not going to be there anytime
In
soon. You're going to
1933,
skydive.
the 40-year-old Madden announced that he was retiring from New York, relocating south to Hot Springs, Arkansas. At that time, Hot Springs, A city famed for its compliant and corrupt police and public officials, was a refuge for nonviolent criminals. After his fierce battles in New York, Batten found the ambiance in Hot Springs vacant. He became that city's illegal gambling market. The Mafia had similar post-prohibition successes against their former Irish and Jewish rivals in other cities. Sizable Irish crews in Chicago and Boston, and Jewish contingents in Detroit, the Purple Gang, and Philadelphia faced two choices. They were either whacked or induced to become hired hands for specific crimes, or allowed to work as compliant bookies, paying the Mafia protection money. While the New York families were solidifying their organization in the 1930s, law enforcement efforts against them were at best haphazard. The United however, took careful notice of the legal trap that ensnared Alphonse Capone, a tax evasion case. Al Capone's birthplace and date of birth are uncertain. Various records indicate that he was born in the late 1890s.
Don't be Derek watching before me.
Where he grew up. Like many of his era's gangsters, Capone was an 80s school dropout, but his basic training as a doctor of street gangs. Working as a bouncer in a combination bar and bar, Capone was slashed outside his face, providing him with the sinister nickname Scarface.
Time to kill.
He arrived in Chicago as an enforcer and gun-toting bodyguard, just as prohibition and the beer wars were raging. By the mid-1920s, Capone had shot his way to the top of Chicago's gangland and was running multi-million-dollar bootlegging, prostitution, and gambling enterprises. The raucous climate generated by prohibition turned gangsters into press celebrities and rogue heroes. Capone basked in the limelight. His favorite interview statements were, "I am the businessman, giving the people what they want, and all I do is satisfy the public demand." The stout, balding Capone made no attempt to avoid camera scrutiny. He relished front row. His conspicuousness and violence finally backfired. On St. Valentine's Day in 1929, 6 members of the gang of his arch-enemy, George Bucks Moran, and an innocent optometrist who had stopped by to visit, were lined up against the garage wall and machine-gunned to death. Chicago's law enforcement authorities were in Capone's pocket and made no serious effort to investigate the slaughter or any of Capone's activities in Florida. His conspicuousness and violence finally backfired. On St. Valentine's Day in 1929, 6 members of the gang of his arch-enemy, George Bucks Moran, and an innocent optometrist who had stopped by to visit, were lined up against the garage wall and machine-gunned to death. Chicago's law enforcement authorities were in Capone's pocket and made no serious effort to investigate the slaughter or any of Capone's activities. But the horrendous St. Valentine's Day massacre provoked the administration of President Herbert Hoover to pin something on the haughty Capone. Furthermore, the administration was committed to enforcing prohibition, and Capone's open defiance and his striking visibility were embarrassing and mocking. An extensive paper chase by a special Treasury Department unit barely scratched the surface of Capone's actual illicit spoils. But the squad of auditors and investigators unearthed records linking payments to him from 1924 to 1929, totaling $1,038,654. Income never declared for tax purposes. Capone was defeated by diligent accountants, not by the Federal Bureau of Investigation, nor by the intrepid G-man Elliot Ness and his band of incorruptible sleuths featured in popular Hollywood and television versions of the story. Found guilty of tax evasion, Capone began serving his sentence in 1932. Suffering from advanced syphilis, he was imprisoned for 7 years in the dreaded Alcatraz Penitentiary and other stringent federal prisons. Released in 1939, the once invincible Capone was a broken, pitiful invalid. He never returned to Chicago, dying in 1947 at his Florida mansion. His downfall had no impact on the New York bosses, except as a warning about tax evasion investigations. Capone's authority had been confined to the Chicago area, and his commission seat could easily be filled by one of his lieutenants. The New Yorkers also viewed Capone as a questionable believer in mafia culture and its structure. They had doubts about him because he declined to comply with the ritual induction of made men and failed to appoint capos or the consigliere. In essence, it was certain that he even considered himself a mafioso. Because of those jurists, Capone's outfit functioned more like a partnership than a traditional borgata, and he violated a cardinal tradition by delegating responsibilities to non-Italians. Capone made a fortune from his rackets.
Hey, end the video right quick.
Why?
I want to show you something. What I'm playing.
His fame was greater than his actual influence and power. At the end, Capone's exaggerated underworld importance became a fatal liability for him. 6. Runaway jury. Al Capone's misfortunes in the early 1930s had no immediate counterpart in New York, where local and federal law enforcement authorities were either too corrupt, too indifferent, or too ignorant to disturb mafia families. The city's newspapers, then the principal source of news and information, were equally passive about investigating and reporting the emergence of the new organized crime.
I'm in the storm.
Gangsters, murders, and kidnappings made
That's why I saw a car somewhere.
almost a welcome relief from the grim economic news of the
And I'm
Depression.
dead.
For the most part, reporters and editors portrayed individual racketeers sympathetically. And Damon Williams' colorful guys and dolls yarns about lovable rogues became the accepted universal myth about monsters and criminals. Instead of exposing the mob's almost wide open
Y'all want sausage?
labor industrial racketeering, extortion, and prostitution activity.
Wait, Gerald!
Some influential editors and
Dinner's ready!
hobnobbed, gambled,
Yeah.
and with the underworld characters. Herbert Bayard Swope, the editor of the prestigious New York World,
What about a hair dryer? Y'all want a hair dryer too?
owed his mob bookies $700,000.
Okay.
Walter Winchell and other nationally syndicated Broadway columnists cultivated relationships with gangsters for gossipy tips
And
and
take a picture from
authorities were even more negligent than the sycophantic press.
Yeah, they probably played
A
program
string of
about
elected district attorneys in Manhattan, New York County, the center of the city's vice
And you
industry,
died?
never probed any of the blatant rackets. The district attorneys were usually hand-picked incompetents designated by the Democratic Party's County Hall Club, a group of party leaders who controlled nominations and elections in Manhattan, a Democratic stronghold. Since the early days of Prohibition, Sandy's leaders were on the slush-fund payrolls of Italian and Jewish gangs to protect them from potential reform crusaders and police interference. The
Richard!
handling of a Manhattan grand
Oh,
jury
Red,
in March
come make it black.
1935 unexpectedly provoked a law enforcement earthquake. All of these
my dad does
customary easily solved crimes. The ineffectual Manhattan district attorney, William Copeland Dodge, instructed the jurors to concentrate on indicting his regular agenda of suspects arrested for minor felonies. Dodge's only other priority target was the absurd threat of the Red Menace, and he suggested that the jurors focus on the Communist Party newspaper, The Worker, which he felt was using the Depression to foment insurrection. A grand jury's task is to weigh evidence and to vote whether or not there is sufficient evidence to bring it for trial. Normally, grand juries are easily manipulated by the prosecutors. They have to carry only the prosecution's version to turn out felony indictments in assembly line action. But the 23 Manhattan grand jurors, led by a strong-minded member, revolted, demanding an independent investigation into the straining rapids of the city. Their outcry was endorsed by the city's bar association and by several ministers and civic associations. The runaway jury was a hot newspaper story, and its pressure forced Governor Herbert Lehman to appoint a special prosecutor to examine the reformers' allegations. Layman, a Democrat, selected a 33-year-old former federal prosecutor, the Republican Thomas E. Dewey. Raised in the small town of Owasso, Michigan, Dewey stayed in New York after getting a law degree at Columbia University. A 3-year stint in the U.S. Attorney's Office in Manhattan turned him into a formidable prosecutor. Most of his federal cases involved bootlegging.
Don't you feel like a couple of milk? You only for a little bit.
Exhibited a trademark courtroom talent, an uncanny memory of the tiniest detail of a crime that would trip up a hostile witness in cross-examination. Giving up a successful Wall Street practice, Dewey leaped at the prosecutorial opportunity offered by Lehman, even though it meant a huge salary cut. Unlike the occupied time of all DAs, the aggressive Dewey didn't sit back waiting for cases to come to him. He understood how to gather evidence and had the foresight to make his objective destruction of the organization, rather than convicting low-level hoodlums. At the time of his appointment, there were virtually no restrictions on the use of telephone taps by state prosecutors in New York. And Dewey made maximum use of that tool to dig up evidence in the Dewey lacked precise insight into the existence of the mafia organized with their organizational structures, but he instinctively understood that it was being challenged by a new kind of criminal. The racketeer who never personally committed a murder or a hijacking or extorted a penny from a victim. The dirty work was left to henchmen, who were the ones risking arrest. To prosecute mob bosses effectively, Dewey had to overhaul a cumbersome criminal procedure law. Under an existing New York rule, a defendant could be tried only on each specific count. That meant multiple crimes, even if the culprit had been indicted for 100 separate acts. With the help of lobbying by reformed politicians and organizations, Dewey persuaded the legislature to authorize joinder indictments, a procedure used in federal courts that permitted a single trial on combined charges. It was a legal weapon that Dewey could employ in court to prosecute gangsters on multiple counts and link them to the crimes actually committed by their flunkies. The first prominent racketeer targeted by Dewey was Dutch Schultz. Born Arthur Fleckenheimer, Schultz was another ragtag criminal who cashed in on the floodgates opened by prohibition. He formed a mainly a Jewish strongman. It took over distribution of beer in the Bronx through terror tactics, murders, kidnappings, and torture. Schultz rivaled the mafia in the scope of his operations and in the enmity he aroused. When Dewey became the special state prosecutor, Schultz's gang was the only non-Italian organization left in New York that was not subservient to the mafia. Underworld cognoscenti referred to the 5 Cosa Nostra families in Schultz's outfit as the Big Six. Schultz also had sound business sense. As bootlegging waned, he acquired control of a restaurant workers' union and used it to extort favored peace bribes from restaurants. Renowned spots, including Broadway's Lindy's and the Brass Rail, were compelled to bribe him in order to remain open. In his search for easy money to replace the lost bootlegging revenue, Schultz and his ferocious leg breakers took over the numbers or policy racket in Harlem from African American and Hispanic bankers. During Prohibition, bootlegging was so extraordinarily profitable that the various gangs looked askance at the income from numbers as chump change and little interest in operating primarily white neighborhoods. The racist gangsters derisively regarded numbers as the nigger pool. But tens of thousands of New Yorkers played the numbers games that paid 600 to 1 for picking 3 digits chosen daily from the returning handle. The last 3 numbers of the total pari-mutuel day at a horse racing track. For a depression-ranked population, winning the numbers was a popular fantasy, even if the wager was just a few pennies. Dutch envisioned the numbers game as an essential substitute for his vanished bootlegging. He consolidated schools of small-time independent numbers operators in Harlem and the Bronx. The old-timers averaged choice of working and paying a generous percentage of their take to Schultz, or winding up in the morgue. Schultz quickly found that his plunge into numbers was the right move. The games grossed an estimated $20 million a year in bets, and there were few lucky winners to cut into Schultz's profits. Schultz's incendiary temper probably helped eliminate opposition to his new acquisitions. If enraged, Schultz, dubbed the Dutchman in the New York underworld, would kill even in front of witnesses. J. Richard Dixon Davis, Schultz's lawyer, once remarked that the Dutchman was the president.
Is this still something in there?
By shoving a gun into a man's mouth.
Go wash your hands, girl.
Good morning, Maggie.
Sure you either is or it isn't.
I've been trying for hours.
What is the prediction? For the man? For the weather?
Turn off that light, girl.
Emily must wear her union suit and Teddy would put on his heavy
In the bathroom, too.
They made it themselves.
Girl, you fly and ghetto with them brand new high heel stilettos. Smell like the rose petals. Are you a rock star? Heavy metal. Well, I'm a pop star. Let's get together. Ice your neck up. Change the weather. See a hot one like a pepper. And you fly, girl. Shake your feathers.
The event. Katie, this rook must be taken out and beaten before Mr. McGarrigan and the other guests arrive. Mr. Kessler? I've already seen the paper. Working out arrested.
He is innocent. This must not mention.
I'm going to the jail.
This is I must go. It is mayhem.
Was Mr. Thompson able to? Do you want me to do it now? What sort of coat do you have?
You understand you're in a precarious situation. Uncertain, not secure. What would it be? Just for your own protection.
What's this? No one else.
Where do you think they came from me? Not a coincidence, was it?
Glad could be anytime.
Not as long as they thought I could help you.
So why did they think you couldn't notice this?
Look like
What were you doing election?
Frog Harry.
Basically, he didn't
That's
shit.
funny, we don't
Had enough time to tell us if anybody need to come in.
And the other wars?
I would did the other ones.
Mary, boy,
Deals just going on good on.
And boy, you asking the wrong question and you know it. Ain't no one of the pikers goddamn to make a squeal. Less than they be put up to it. Yes. You could have done that.
Isaac Ginsburg?
He's my attorney.
What are you supposed to do that?
What about me? Trump will be patient. That's all I ask. Please. Hey, why don't you lower down if you can? Okay, this motherfucker. I won't pretend you're inclined to be warm to me. I wouldn't insult you like that. Because before anything else, I have great respect for you. Your wisdom, your achievements.
Yeah.
You never really told me. But you and Trump are related. We have something in common. Yeah, Trump is Christian. Chuck volunteered to absent himself from this meeting. He felt his presence might be disruptive, but it's not council. We are all learning. So I'll say. And what can I learn from you, Mr. Darnley? That things are changing in Atlantic City. Feel the market for quality liquor coming in off the beaches at a reasonable price and a good supply.
Thank you for the song. Thank you for your guest. Right. What the money? What the hell? Yeah, you better give me that ammo. That's I'm gonna use it. Yeah, that ain't long. Did I forget about his fault? No. Who said that? I don't know. And who said that? I don't know. Concentrate. Oh, hello. What's happened?
You know. I mean,
Things seem to be changing faster than I realized. Don't wait.
Yeah, like saying no.
Your business and yes here.
No, it's yes, though. We play poker.
This happened.
Dropping down to kill some people.
we stay troopers. Go, man.
bumped into me. Let's see, I just need some help. It's just all around the sun. What's this one? I think it's something. I test it right now. Yep, I say keep a maker on you. It says that somebody's already healing. Using mace. Oh, okay. Or can I jump down the stairs? Back here. Nice job. Oh, look, Anna.
Oh, that's what you do with the honeymoon bit. Oh, come on, let's even give us anything. Come on, let's see how you need to do it.
somebody can come in and die on my shotgun. Now I'm gonna go underground now. And then explode your entire phone through. Yes, stop breaking around. Hi, Daddy.
Since the alarm clock to 10:30, Mr.
Alexa, set a timer until 10:30.
You gotta get up and go tell the Mr.
I don't
nice singing music.
I had no idea. You telling me walking around this should be a move. Dress up like old hip hop here. Hip hop.
What you do know about the 90s? She wasn't even born in the 90s. She was a baby in the 90s. She know her thing. She wasn't even a baby. She was born in 98. Like that. She was a baby in the 90s. She's still a baby. She's still too young to really just remember the 90s.
What, the alarm already went off?
You must have
Alexa!
done something wrong.
No, there's well, I think they put on a timer or something.
Alexa! Stop! If I say give me a shield, got some more ammo. Bro, let me go. did he die? Bro, did he for real die? He died! God. Got the ball. Sandy gold bar. Sandy gold bar.